All right, here is this weekend's edition of Wild and Weird Old Articles. What if the Egyptians and Assyrians were from America and they built a massive underground highway under the Mississippi River in St. Louis? I found this article and I almost can't stop laughing because it's so crazy. So I believe this was published in 1869. And they're talking about the excavation work that was being done as they were building one of the major bridges over the Mississippi River in St. Louis. While they were blasting the rocks in the bottom of the excavation for the foundation of a pier for this bridge, they discharged an extraordinarily large blast of powder when immediately after the report, a strange phenomenon presented itself. Instead of having the usual time for the smoke to clear away, they saw it ascend rapidly in a column as though issuing from the smokestack of one of their steamers. It soon cleared, and it was found that a steady amount of air with a strange damp odor was issuing from the cavernous excavation, showing that an opening had been made into some unknown subterranean passage. Upon descending to the bottom, the usual mud and water had disappeared through a dark, deep opening in the rock about 10 feet in diameter, made by the last discharge of powder. Ropes, ladders, and torches were immediately procured, and careful explorations begun. They go on to say that they cannot currently enter into a detailed description, but having been invited to accompany the Board of Engineers from the Academy of Science and Historical Society, they will reserve a full exposition of the wonderful discovery until they have made a more careful survey. I wonder if that ever happened, if they ever exposed more information about it, or if it just disappeared. They say, suffice for the present to say that it is certain that this corridor they found passes entirely under the river to the Illinois shore, and whether it is wholly the work of some ancient race who once inhabited this land, whose interesting remains are strewn so thickly up and down this great valley, or whether it is partially natural and partially artificial, remains to be seen. In either case, it is nonetheless stupendous. The main passages we should judge to be about 20 feet high by 15 broad, and systematically overhead part of the way by cutting through solid rock and part of substantial masonry. The bottom was much worn as if by carriage wheels of some sort. So this was a roadway, you guys, that went under the Mississippi from the Missouri side to the Illinois side. And it was 20 feet by 15 feet. There are also many lateral passages, which of course we had no time to enter. They're about 8 feet high and 6 feet wide. They go on to say that in the main passageway they saw no tools or implements of workmanship, but when they entered one of the lateral passages, they emerged into a large chamber supported by pillars of solid rock. In that around the walls of this chamber there were what seemed to be niches closed with closely fitting slabs, each slab covered with inscriptions. And I'm having trouble reading that word, but it says the inscriptions, I believe it says, were in runic uniform character, which to our eyes bore a marvelous resemblance to those upon the slab from the mines of Nineveh. Between the niches were projecting pilasters with draped Assyrian or Egyptian heads, which presented a most impressive and awe-inspiring effect as they were illuminated by the torchlight. It goes on to say that one of the passages opening on the north side seemed to follow the course of the river, and it is believed extends to the great mound now being removed by the North Missouri Railroad, which was the theme of much interesting remark at the last meeting of the Historical Society. So St. Louis was originally known as Mound City, and it was covered in massive mounds. Cahokia Mounds is still across the river in Illinois, which is one of the biggest. It says that the mound known as Monk's Mound is on the other side of the river and is but one of a continuous chain of mounds extending from the river to the bluffs, a distance of 9 miles. It is conjectured that the tunnel under the river and the mounds are intimately connected, and that there was in ancient times an opening through the mounds from the subterranean highway. And then they go on to mention that when they were excavating Monk's Mound, that also disagreeable gases and odors would come out of it, the same way they were describing happened when they broke through, when they were putting the pillar in for the river, that they broke through and stinky air came out. The same thing happened with Monk's Mound, which makes them think that it's all connected. They then discovered a descending opening about 7 feet high by 3 feet wide. Following this about 50 yards, they found a flight of steps, 41 steps, in ascending, in which they found themselves in a chamber of wonders, oval in shape, about 7 feet high and 3 feet wide. The walls of this chamber were sculpted in magnificent bas relief and runic inscriptions. They have a professor looking at these inscriptions, and he is very confident of some of the words, and that also one of the magnificent groups he's certain is intended to represent Ahasuerus crowning Queen Elizabeth. I'm not sure what that means. And I don't understand what this sentence means either, but it sounds interesting. It says another group of colossal figures representing captives following the car, I don't know what car means, of a victorious conqueror, are portraits of Luke Deuteronomy and the friend going into captivity. I'm not familiar with that. I do not know what that means. And then they go on to compare this to the treasures of Rock Island discovery, and I'm not familiar with that. I'm going to have to look that up next. And they believe it's possible both of these places were the work of the same ancient people. So they're implying that the work was done by Assyrians or Egyptians in St. Louis under the Mississippi. So there you go. There are so many articles like this, you guys. I know that people struggle to wrap their minds around there not being the archaeological evidence to support biblical lands being in America that they want there to be. But there is evidence, but we have to look outside of where we're used to looking, because there are so many articles like this, and then they end with they reported it to the Smithsonian, and then that was the end of that. Nothing ever came of it. There are so many articles, like the huge massive metropolis that was buried under the creation of the Hoover Dam, buried it. And now there's no information about it. It was massive amounts of evidence. It was all hidden. So we had to keep looking, because there is information out there. It's just harder to find, right? Anyway, I thought this article was so cool, so I wanted to share it.